Our next speaker is Vinit Gonhino. She advises the financial services sector, government and civil society on financial inclusion. Vinita is passionate about Indigenous inclusion, and she will be talking today about her experience collaborating with Indigenous populations on culturally appropriate financial well-being. Please welcome her to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thanks for letting me share my research interest with you today. I apologise for the sore throat, but this is the best I've been in a week or so. I'd like to start by acknowledging the elders who've contributed to my study over the last 3.5 years, who played a vital role in where I stand today. So thank you to everybody. So as the introduction mentioned, I'm absolutely passionate about financial inclusion. So I was so interested to see that 7 out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals have inclusive finance at the center of their targets, which is really very pleasing to me. Many people, though, are surprised to see that in a developed country like Australia, 17% of our population is actually excluded from inclusive finance. So we define financial exclusion in Australia as the lack of access to safe, affordable, and appropriate financial products and services. And while that sounds like a mouthful, what that actually translates into is the young single mother who's on a pension, needs $600 to buy a washing machine, but cannot qualify for a bank credit. And therefore, the only options she has is to go to a payday lender or to a rent-to-buy scheme, which can actually cost her twice as much as you and I if we had bank access. It also refers to people in a remote community who don't have access to a bank branch and so must use an ATM to withdraw their own cash and pay $5 for the privilege of doing so. So that's what financial exclusion in Australia means. 17% of our population, which is about 3 million adults, are financially excluded. But if you happen to be Indigenous, you're 2.5 times more likely to be excluded. Indigenous people are also associated with lower financial capability. They're also more excluded, irrespective whether they live in remote, regional, or urban locations, with exactly the same access as everyone else. So there's something more than just access to finance, which is the issue here. Research so far has concentrated on measuring the fact that Indigenous exclusion persists, but there's not very much exploration as to why it persists or what the exclusion actually looks like from Indigenous eyes. In fact, some of the research suggests that cultural norms, such as obligations to family and kin, are a barrier to financial inclusion. For someone from a culturally and linguistically diverse CALD background myself, I found that very difficult to swallow. And I was completely passionate to study the link between money and culture. And as a banker of 20 years, I was quite a good place to do so. But I designed a very, very different study, very different to the banker's view of money. I chose to study money from the eyes of my Indigenous communities itself and looked for their worldviews on money, financial capability, and what financial well-being means to them. I chose to adopt a strengths-based approach, which looks at ways in which culture can become an enabler rather than a barrier to financial inclusion. And I chose to define well-being as the freedom that Indigenous people themselves have to achieve the financial goals that they have reason to value, based on Amartya Sen's definition of the human capabilities approach. Research already told me that financial capability, which is the ability to make informed decisions about money in order to improve your well-being, is actually more about individual behavioral, personality issues, socio-cultural belief systems, and one's sense of cultural identity, rather than about one's knowledge or education about finances. What I was more interested in, though, was the concept of financial resilience, which hasn't yet been defined fully, which is the ability to recover from financial shocks that any of us can be subject to. Typically, this is found to be savings, borrowings, and other forms of support, but I was looking for ways in which culture and one's sense of cultural identity can actually help us to build resilience and well-being. So what did I find? The first thing I started with is the banker's view of what money is, which is a very Western definition of money based on economics. Money is defined by its functions. Money is a medium of exchange, money is a unit of account, and money is the store of long-term value. But when I looked at this through the sociological lens, through the eyes of my Indigenous participants, I actually found characteristics which were culturally distinctive from the Western views of money. I found that the domestic boundary through which money flows is not the nuclear family household of the Western family. It's actually a larger, much more fluid, extended boundary of family and kin. I found that money is not the top priority of my participants, that caring for their family is, and that there is constant sharing of resources, including money, food, shelter, clothing, that is constantly shared between this larger extended boundary. I also found that my participants constantly said to me that money has been imposed on them from outside their culture, as a result of which money is disconnected from the wealth of traditional knowledge that exists in terms of managing, allocating, and preserving valued resources. But none of this has been connected to money because of the way in which it has been imposed. I also found a reliance on elders to learn about how to use money wisely, yet most of our policy is aimed at financial education for young children through the school curriculum, leaving the knowledge gap for the elders. As a result of which I created a sociology of indigenous money, money as seen through the eyes of my indigenous participants, which, as I mentioned, is culturally distinctive from the Western understandings of money. This understanding of money, if I now go back to the definition of what is money, money for my indigenous participants is more a medium of relationships than a medium of exchange. Caring, not money, is the unit of account that my participants care most about. Family, not money, is the store of long-term value, and that's what people want to put their time and effort towards preserving. So what implications does this have for policymakers who rightly want to develop financial inclusion for Indigenous people? Well, we must learn to recognize that the lens through which my participants look at money is that money is for caring, which is a very different approach to what we're used to from a Western lens of money. And this influences every element of financial well-being: capability, access to finance, what people want to do with their money, and the agency, how they themselves want to be able to lift themselves out of financial stress and move towards financial resilience. So my time now is spent talking to policymakers who are looking at culturally appropriate design and talking to them about what this actually means. So financial inclusion should be relevant to the daily lives of the community members themselves. Financial education should empower them to use money confidently to achieve their own goals. And from the point of view of Indigenous financial inclusion, there are some very, very particular policy implications that must be put into our policy interventions. Financial education must connect to traditional knowledge systems, and there's a wealth of knowledge systems there that we can connect into. We must also build the capacity, financial capacity of the elders, so that they can fulfill their traditional role of showing people how to use money wisely and to be the custodians of knowledge. We also must find ways to include the language of caring when we talk about money, saving, managing, and investing. For example, thinking about saving as caring for oneself so that one can care for others. Thinking about financial goals as being family and community-oriented goals rather than just about individual goals. Those are just some of the small examples of how we can incorporate culturally appropriate design. So what does this mean for the Sustainable Development Goals? Since we are in this room and hopefully able to define and implement these over the coming years, my appeal to the policymakers is to remember that many different groups amongst the vulnerable may be seeing these goals and the targets that are attached to these goals very differently to our own lenses. So we must remember to be able to see differently every element of these Sustainable Development Goals. This effort must be community-led so that people themselves can define what their goals are and how they want to achieve them. They must empower people and build on their strengths, including the sense of cultural identity. We cannot possibly separate this from socioeconomic selves. And we must empower people to confidently use the resources to achieve their own goals. And as a way of wrapping this up and finishing within the 10 minutes that I was given, I'd like to show a very quick clip which is from one of our partners at WUNAN in terms of how just an Indigenous organization can have a culturally informed and strengths-based approach, if you wouldn't mind.
G'day, I'm Ian Trust, the Executive Chair of WUNAN Foundation, a not-for-profit Aboriginal organisation based in Kununurra in the East Kimberley region of Western Australia. I'd like to share with you a metaphor that I've developed to explain the key issues facing my people, the Aboriginal people of the East Kimberley. It's titled Swimming in the River. The way I see it is like this. For most of the past 70,000 years, if you were Aboriginal, you had to cross a harsh and unrelenting desert. In this harsh environment, we not only survived but prospered. and this was long before we had mining royalties and government services. The key to our survival, of course, was a close-knit community where everyone cared about the well-being of each other, where everyone contributed to the survival of your community. If you were a child, you learned from the day you were born how to survive in this harsh environment and the rules which maintained your community. Elders enforced strict norms and values and a sense of responsibility towards each other, our children and our old people. These things were embedded in our culture. A couple of 100 years ago, the first settlers arrived and our world was turned upside down. Our people no longer roamed free anymore, and new skills were needed to succeed in this new world. Now, instead of the desert, there were new barriers to our survival that we needed to navigate. Now we had to learn to swim a river. And where you learn to swim this river is at places they call schools. These schools are set up to teach you how to read and write and other important skills so you can swim the river. And the reason that we must learn to swim the river is because all the opportunities in this new world are on the other side of the river. These opportunities include things such as jobs, houses and business opportunities, all of which contribute to a better life.
So I've had to stop that off just so that we have a little bit of time to take questions, but I would encourage you to look at Ian's vision, and it summarizes the power of elders and the strength of a community-based approach to walking towards financial resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanita. Thank you. Does anyone have a question for Vanita? If you'd like to just make your way down to the microphone, we can accommodate one at least. Anyone? Just if you're quick. And please...
Doesn't anyone else want to ask a question? Okay. All the qualities that you presented in the family relationships, everything, these are totally qualitative measures. There's nothing quantitative about them because they're really diverse and they're always supportive. Why are you trying to use a money model, which is the total antithesis of this, I mean, noting the experience that we've had in Western culture, to facilitate what already people want to give anyway? You know, like, I don't get that.
Sorry, if I've interpreted your question properly, you're asking why I'm using the model of the understanding of money to talk about
yeah,
okay.
Or even a different kind of money, because the one that we're using now is very, destabilizing.
Yeah. This research was actually on the basis of requests from elders from the community themselves who felt that there's a very different way in which different cultures understand money, yet there's not much research which actually looks at how different cultures want to value and want to use money. So that's the reason why, even though I'm a banker and used to quantitative numbers, I actually chose a sociological and anthropological approach to look at money through the eyes of storytelling. So that's why it's a very qualitative piece of research that was done to look at what is often talked about in terms of numbers. But at the end of the day, as a banker, I know that no matter how much we talk about money and economics, what's actually at the end of that transaction is a human being, their sense of cultural identity. And as long as a resource cannot connect with their cultural identity as a whole, you cannot expect those people to be able to use resources in ways that please them and achieve their own goals. And that's why I chose a sociological approach to build this building step. For me, this is just step one in the whole journey of walking with communities in terms of how they want to understand money and how they would like to use it.